Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, one show I want to bring your attention to, and then we're going to jump over to Jeff Duncan and get the latest from the Saints. Had a great conversation this week with Terry Green, the co-owner of Island View and Beachview Casinos, and his horse passion and the building of his horse farm up in Lexington, and now on Monday, his horse, Gulfport, affectionately called Gulfport, runs in Saratoga. And we talked about why that's so significant. And Terry's just been doing some amazing work. He's been in the horse business for many, many years. But in the last, say, 4 years, he's gotten into thoroughbred racing and breeding. And it's just a fascinating conversation. You go to the SuperTalk Gulf Coast Facebook page and watch it if you're interested. Now let's move over to my friend Jeff Duncan, who is the man with the plan. He's a columnist and writer for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. No one is more connected than Jeff Duncan. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation today, Jeff, because first thing I'm going to say to you is good morning, but then I'm going to say you called it the way it was going to play out. Most of the seats on this team were pretty much sewed up a long time ago. There were a few surprises, but for the most part, we're bringing back an incredibly talented and experienced team, aren't we?
Yeah, I think the Saints really did almost exactly what most people thought in terms of their 53-man roster. I think the big surprise was, of course, the trade of C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I don't think a lot of people anticipated that, but that opened up a roster spot. And that was really the only surprise I felt like at all last week.
And fans, including my son Jordan, fans are sick about it. We do, as you pointed out during the break, we fall in love with players. But, I guess he was the odd man out, just given the situation.
Well, it was really, I wrote a column about it this week trying to explain to people, it was really a business decision. The Saints have two major contracts that they're trying to get done long term. Eric McCoy, which could happen, I think, in the next few weeks. Their starting center, and Marcus Davenport, who, if he has a breakout season, is going to command a massive deal. Those are two big priority items for the team. They're already projected $60-something million over next year's cap. I mean, the Saints continue to kick that can down the road financially, and sometimes it has implications, and we see that play out in the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson situation, because he is also up for a contract next season and has been in negotiations, and they broke down. He was asking for around $12 million a year, which is exorbitant for a nickel cornerback like himself. The Saints offered, I think, $8 million a year, which is top of the line for that position, and they just couldn't come to an agreement. And so the Saints, of course, had to make a decision. And look, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was causing some problems in practice. I mean, he was refusing to do certain drills. He was acting up at times with coaches. I think they just felt like this was not a good situation. They wanted to kind of wipe the slate clean going into the season because they have such great expectations for this year. They didn't want any distractions.
I got it for sure. Adebo had a breakout camp, and now he's got a hurt ankle. What you hearing about that?
Oh, he's going to be fine. He's going to be fine. He talked to us yesterday in the locker room, and look, they're just being cautious right now. I tweeted out already. I mean, I'm hearing Michael Thomas is going to be fine, and I think the Saints are going to go into that game with really everybody at their disposal. James Hurst is going to be the left tackle. There really aren't any concerns right now. Things can happen, but they have one more day of practice. But right now, this team looks like it's going to be 100% healthy.
Well, you said going into training camp, as I said at the beginning of the show, that 99% of this team is set. There may be a few surprises here or there, but it played out about the way you expected. Again, you mentioned the C.J. Gardner-Johnson trade, but now you have explained why that happened. But, man, we're bringing some continuity into this year with the exception of safeties.
Well, look, this team's built to win now, and it's a veteran team. That's why Dennis Allen's taken the approach he's taken during training camp. He's let guys, take days off. I mean, Mike Thomas hasn't practiced in 2 weeks. He hasn't played in one preseason game yet. because he knows what Mike Thomas is going to bring to this team. He doesn't need to see anything from Mike Thomas. Alvin Kamara has been brought along very slowly as well. So I think he's treated this team differently because he knows it's a veteran team that knows how to prepare itself for game one, and that's really the most important priority. When you look at this team, Ricky, I mean, there are not a lot of young players going to play very much. Maybe Chris Olave, obviously at receiver. Now that Trevor Penning's out at left tackle, I don't see a lot of young players getting a lot of time on this roster.
What's the current thinking of how long Penning's going to be out?
There's really no timetable set on him. I mean, Dennis Allen said it was significant, so that didn't sound good. And the problem really with Penning getting hurt, it's not that James Hurst can't handle left tackle. It's that it really makes you thin there if he goes down. Now you don't have that depth. And Penning is a guy that was really improving and really starting to develop, and I think he was going to win that starting job. And he's a guy that needs reps. That's what he needs to get, I think, up to snuff at the NFL level. And he's not going to get those reps now that he's going to have surgery. I think he's got a torn ligament in his foot. So that's going to require surgery, and that could be multiple months that he's sidelined.
Okay, so was it a big surprise to you at all that the Saints pretty much took many of the players they cut and put them on the 16-man practice squad? I think with the exception of one player. Did I read that right?
Yeah. Well, Ian Book, They wanted him back, the quarterback, and he got signed by the Eagles, and the Saints ended up signing an offensive lineman from the Buffalo Bills. And that's about right. Again, we talked about this before we came on air. We all are guilty of this, but people tend to fall in love and overvalue the players on your team's roster, and that happens every year, Ricky, with the Saints. Every year, there's a receiver that comes along in camp. Like this year, it's Kirk Merritt, Dejon Dixon. Previous years it was Emmanuel Butler, Cyril Grayson. There's always some camp beast, if you will, who people fall in love with, and people think you can't cut him. He's going to get signed by another team. And Dennis Allen even said this week, only 2% of the players that are released for the final cuts end up signing with another team. 2%.
Wow.
So it was easy for the Saints to get their guys back. There's a lot of players out there like Kirk Merritt and Dejon Dixon. That's a position where every team's got a guy like that in their camp. That's a good, young, developing receiver. Those guys, the proliferation of receivers in the passing game over the country is that's something that every team's going to have. So there's really not a value on another team's guy like that.
On the Ian Book deal, you mentioned it, but they didn't have the opportunity to bring him back onto the practice squad. They got a lot of time invested in him, but he didn't set the world on fire when he played. What was your read on what their thinking was about him?
Well, I think he became expendable because the Saints brought in Andy Dalton. That's really, I think, what really cost him a roster spot. Once you have a veteran like Dalton behind Jameis Winston, and then you have the luxury of a guy like Taysom Hill who's played quarterback and won games at the NFL level, that's a roster spot that becomes too valuable to have devoted to a guy like Ian Book that's not going to play, unless a crisis breaks out in a game where you have a run on quarterback injuries. So it just became a numbers game. I think they did still like him, but he's a developmental player, a young player that just needs kind of more time in the league to kind of find his bearings.
I saw an interview with Andy Dalton this week, what he says about the quality of the teammates he has and what he thinks about this team's ability to win and what we think about him. I mean, I didn't realize it till he was announced, but he literally was perfect in preseason.
Yeah. He looked as good as you can look in that Saints offense. Now, look, they're going. I have to caution people sometimes, even with the Jameis Winston performance the other night, which was fantastic. They're going against base coverages, very vanilla defenses. The Chargers played all their backups on defense. There was none of their stars out there. So they should look that way when you're the starters going against something that simple. It's going to change dramatically next Sunday when they play in Atlanta and they're disguising coverages and people are throwing looks at them they haven't seen. But when you watch a guy like Jameis Winston coming back from an injury, you just want to see the mobility, the confidence, the poise And I saw all that. So all those intangibles are kind of the things I was looking at.
So Nick Vannett, in the midst of all this, excuse me, they renegotiated his contract. Is that still part of this salary cap discussion?
Yeah, cap space. $1.5 million. That way you're in good shape if you have some injuries this season, and you're going to have them. So you need some flexibility on the cap.
Let's hope we don't have them like we had them last year. What an incredible year that was. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune and get a sense of how the Saints match up with Atlanta. And also, we'll talk about the games after that. What does he predict in the beginning of the season? We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I almost said SuperTalk Outdoors, my other show that plays across the network. But we have the pleasure on Fridays to be joined by Jeff Duncan from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. He's written several books about the Saints, the definitive book on Drew Brees and Sean Payton. He's in the midst of it all. He's on the Hall of Fame selection committee, and award-winning journalist and columnist. So as we get ready to go to Atlanta, what do you expect?
Well, I mean, it's kind of hard to say, to be honest with you. I think we know that this team. My column, frankly, coming up to that game, Ricky's going to be about how I think there's a wider cone of uncertainty, to use that meteorological term that we're all used to here in the Gulf Coast. There's a wide cone of uncertainty on this team. I think there's reasons to believe they could be very good and maybe have like a 12-win season. And there's reasons to say this team might have a lower floor than some of the past teams because they're relying on so many guys coming back from injury. We don't know yet how the loss of Sean Payton is going to be impacted on this team with Pete Carmichael calling plays, Dennis Allen, the head coach. There's just a lot of moving parts that everybody, I think, is optimistic about where the replacements are or where the new faces are. But we really won't know until they get in the line of fire on game day. So I feel like this team could be very good and could win the division, which I think it would be an upset in most people's minds. But I also think things could go bad quick. If Mike Thomas, who's already got an injury, keeps struggling to stay healthy, and Jameis Winston, if he goes down, I mean, I think there's reason to be optimistic about Andy Dalton, but there's just a lot of uncertainty. So I'm hesitant to say that I think everything's great because I've just seen too many things go bad on a team quickly, and we've already seen some of it happen in camp with Trevor Penning and Traquan Smith.
Hey, you think about what Las Vegas thinks about us, and a lot of people say, "Man, I'm going to go place that bet on the over/under for the number of wins the Saints are expecting to have," but it hasn't really changed very much. So I guess they see that cone of uncertainty that you're talking about, and they're going to have to see it to believe it too. Is that kind of what you think their observations are?
I think that's based primarily in the two faces of the franchise, the head coach and the quarterback. That are new in some ways. I mean, Jameis Winston played 7 games last year, but still don't exactly know how he's going to respond to coming back from injury and with a new offensive coordinator. So I think that's attributable to that. But I tell you, I just wrote a column today for our betting section about, I always try to find a team every year that I think is either going to be better than what everybody thinks or worse. And the team I think is going to be worse than the national experts are projecting is the Bucs. I mean, the Bucs over/under win total is 11.5 wins. I think it's the second highest in the whole NFL. So that means they're going to have to win 12 games for you to lose on the under. And that's a lot of games to win when they're replacing a head coach themselves. Their offensive line's been injury riddled. They have no Gronk. Tom Brady missed 10 games in camp, 10 days in camp. I mean, there's just a lot of things I don't like coming out of Bucs camp. So I think if you're a Saints fan, you should feel optimistic you can compete for the division title. I don't think they're unbeatable at all. And we're going to find out very quickly, Ricky, because they get them in week 2. And listen to this opening 4-game lineup the Bucs have. At Dallas, at New Orleans. They come back home and play the Packers and the Chiefs. I mean, they could be 0-4 easily, maybe 1-3. So I think this thing could quickly get momentum for the Saints, and all of a sudden they could open up a pretty big lead on the Bucs and wire the field.
Woo, Wouldn't that would be fascinating. As you think about the Saints, okay, they could Atlanta, but take us to maybe the first 3 or 4 games, and how do you think it's going to play out?
Well, it's a good user-friendly schedule early. The Saints need to start fast because the schedule gets much harder in the middle of the season. Opening at Atlanta, that's a perfect time to play Atlanta. They're still very young. They're going to have Marcus Mariota at quarterback right now. I think the Saints will be prohibitive favorites in that game and should win that game. Then they come back home and get the Bucs, the Superdome home opener with the Tampa Bay Bucs and Tom Brady. That place is going to be on fire, man. I mean, it's going to be deafening in there. We know the Saints, how well they match up with the Bucs. And then they go to Carolina in week 3. Now Carolina's a sneaky, scary team a little bit. Now they got Baker Mayfield. I think he's a big upgrade at quarterback. And we saw what happened last year when the Saints had a big emotional win against the Packers in week 1. And then they went to Carolina and lost to Sam Darnold and the Panthers, who ended up being terrible. So that's a sneaky trap game because the 4th game of the season, the Saints are flying directly from Charlotte to London to play the Vikings, of course, at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. That's going to be a big, high-profile game, but again, a winnable game for the Saints. So I think that key game is going to be Carolina. Don't overlook Carolina because you have Tampa Bay in your rearview mirror and you get the London trip ahead of you. It's easy to have a letdown in that game, but I think the Saints could easily start 4-0.
That would be incredible. You coming back to Tampa Bay. I mean, we've talked about this before, but Tampa Bay, even with all the guns it had last year, the Saints did really well against Tampa Bay. For whatever reason, this defense has been able to figure out Brady and whatever they bring to the table. And when you consider that so much of that is not there anymore, he's playing with a new coach, and as you pointed out, kind of an interesting offensive line. You don't have Gronk, as you pointed out. It should bode even better for the Saints. But man, we just don't know, do we? There's just a lot of unknowns yet.
Well, the Saints are built, I think, to beat the Bucs. I mean, their defense, the way they play defense, is very similar. Tom Brady right now is a very similar point in his career as we saw Drew Brees in his last few years. He goes to the line of scrimmage. You know how most quarterbacks drop back and they're reading the progressions? I mean, Brady and Brees have been in the league so long, they've already done that before they get to the line of scrimmage. They know where they're going with the ball before the snap. And the Saints, of course, are so good and so physical, they disrupt the timing at the line. They get after the receivers. They're physical on the defensive line. They don't have to blitz. They're just a perfect defensive antidote to what he does. And I don't think that's going to change when they play here in a couple of weeks because I think the Saints they're so physically strong and so long, and their mindset, I think, they're in the head of the Tampa Bay Bucs. And I think Tampa Bay, like I said, they go to Dallas. They could easily lose that game and then have to go to New Orleans. That's a tough opening 2-game stretch for them. I think things could snowball on them.
Saints have had, with the exception of a couple of key injuries, as you pointed out, Saints have had a good training camp. They've been very methodical. Read where we were talking about how practices start and how well tuned the machine it was, and on and on and on. But you said early on, and you've said this before, and I'll just get I think it's worth mentioning that. The Saints have actually underpaid and have had some slow starts and gone on to do incredible things. And you described that as the ability to handle adversity, not to get down about a slow start, but to be able to handle the situation, make the appropriate adjustments, and move on. And I think it's still a big question mark about our new coach. Will he be able to handle adversity? Talk about why that's so important.
Well, I mean, I've talked to Ryan Nielsen, the Saints co-defensive coordinator, the other day about it. He said, look, you got to take each game. I know it sounds cliche, but you have to take each game as an individual unit because they count the same. And he brought up last year, beating Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers. They handed Aaron Rodgers the worst loss of his career. I mean, that's amazing. That's one of the greatest players in the history of the NFL. And then they come back the next week and lose to Carolina. They beat Tampa Bay. And then the next week they lose to the New York Giants. He said, we have to be more consistent. And that lack of consistency is what kept the Saints out of the playoffs last year. Even when they got those injuries, because they dropped those games earlier, they had no margin for error. And they're not going to have that margin for error this year either. So I really think they've got to learn to be more consistent, especially on the defensive side of the ball where they are elite, Ricky. I mean, I'm writing a story about this defense for our preseason section. I mean, I think it's the best defense statistically, analytically. It's the best defense they've had since the Dome Patrol. And you could argue that it's actually better considering how much harder it is to play defense these days in the modern era where the rules are slanted to the offense. So they need this defense to carry this team while the offense finds its footing early on this season. A lot of new moving parts. Mike Thomas hasn't been on the field. Jameis is still coming back. Landry's being woven into the plan. I mean, I think the offense is going to have to, get its bearings early. But this defense should dominate from the outset.
It's going to be very interesting. Hey, listen, in the short time we have left, I want to remind people that if you want to get sort of a preeminent newsletter on the Saints, sign up for the NOLA.com Times-Picayune newsletter. The team at NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune is second to none. And now that they've actually added you heard Jeff mention this betting side, they're doing a lot of analytical work as it relates to and some really smart guys really actually having some terrific conversations about the whole betting situation. So, sign up for that newsletter. And we got less than a minute, but you've got a great team, don't you, Jeff?
Yeah, we got a new reporter, Taryn Walk, who came in, been covering NASCAR, and she's hit the ground running. She's getting her first taste of covering the NFL. It's a lot of fun to see her on the NFL beat. And look, we're looking forward to a big, exciting season. It's going to be a fun one. I think it's going to be very compelling one way or the other.
Yeah, thank you for being available to us, my friend. This has been Jeff Duncan. We'll see. You have a great week, my friend, and we'll see you after this break.